to bring on our amazing guest here for this week. And he is a well-known figure in retail. He's spoken at many events. He's been at Microsoft for the last 22 years, primarily solving complex customer challenges using a combination of technology and organization change. He also leads the retail strategy at Microsoft, has the opportunity to work with multiple startups, and he's got a interesting, very unique view into the ecosystem of what's happening in retail across the world. And, I'm sure we're going to learn a bunch of things from him today. So I can't wait to welcome you here, ShiSh. Welcome to the Retail Perch.
Thank you, Shekar, and thank you, Gary. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, and so ShiSh, I know I have seen you. I think we just talked about it before the show kicked off. On the stage at Grocery Shop a couple of years ago. But
Yep.
I'd love to know, and I'm sure our listeners would too, as to your journey of where did you start from, and how did you wind up in retail, and why are you so excited about it?
Yep. So my journey in Microsoft, I've been in Microsoft for 24 years, and really it didn't stop with retail. I was primarily a Lotus Notes guy, and at the time, Lotus Notes was big in the late 90s, and Microsoft was working on strategies and products to compete against Notes. And that's really where I started as a developer evangelist. But that work actually got me engaged with a lot of Microsoft customers, and I was working with the customer ecosystem a fair amount of time, 80% of the time with retailers. And that's around the time when Microsoft decided we're going to be focusing on vertical industries and created the vertical industry teams. And I was among the first few people, because of my experience and expertise with retail. I started working in the retail industry team, created the strategy and what's Microsoft's point of view for retail. That also got me very deeply engaged in the retail industry, working with NRF and at the time with ARTS, and also working with all of the top retailers around the world, understanding what the big challenges were and applying technology to them. And that was really a big part of my learning journey over the years, from the early 2000s till now, where I've been deeply engaged with retailers around the world. And that's been my education, really. That also, at the same time, I think got me into working on white papers, collaborating with retailers, collaborating with ARTS on the retail data model, and also most recently, just before ARTS migrated over to OMG, worked on IoT for retail. And all of that, I think, was really my introduction education. And along the way, I found, I think, a passion for retail. It is a very exciting space, which is a combination of something that is very personal for people. Shopping is a big part of everybody. And at the same time, the other element that's really interesting is the combination of how technology is transforming the landscape and changing the way, almost at a very rapid pace, how retail is being done. I think for many years it was pretty much the same thing, and then we saw a very rapid change happening. Most importantly, I would say last year, we saw an acceleration of things. And that was, I think, for me, a very exciting period where we were seeing the vision that we had that was 3 or 4 years down becoming reality for many retailers. A lot of the capabilities that would have probably taken maybe a couple of years got implemented in a couple of months. And I think that transformation, the ability to impact change in how retail is being done was very exciting. And I think that combination of technology and retail and the possibilities there excites me a lot. And I think we are barely there in that overall journey of how retail is going to transform. I think there is a long way to go. There's a lot of transformations. There's a lot of exciting technology coming out, and retailers are experimenting, exploring all of these things. And I think we're barely there. I mean, I'm looking at everything from mixed reality, virtual reality. Most importantly, I'm super excited about additive manufacturing and how that is going to impact retail and e-commerce. And I think that there's the best is yet to come, I would say.
Yeah. Well, I was going to tell my listeners that if you could see how excited ShiSh was, you almost feel like he's going to jump out of the screen. I can see the excitement that ShiSh has about retail, and we definitely share in that optimism and excitement here. No question about that. And it has been a very exciting and interesting, I guess. When you have such massive events happen, it always spurs innovation. It spurs out of the box thinking, right? Because you got to find solutions to things, and it's amazing to see what's been coming about. But Gary, you want to pick up on that?
Sure, I'll jump in with a question here. So, from your perspective, and I think you've got a really interesting view into retail from where you sit at Microsoft. As you were just saying, obviously a lot has happened over the past 12, 18 months. And traditional retailers, in a sense, almost being forced to change.
Yep.
Do you think looking forward that traditional retailers are going to be able to change fast enough to keep up with, this massive transformation that's happening across the industry? Or where do you see the big challenges?
Well, I think the challenges in the past. So if I look at the driving force last year, compared to pre-2020, the pace at which that transformation is happening and what happened last year, I think the situations that trigger the transformation is an important element for it to move forward very quickly. I think the challenge that I see is unless there is a trigger, and the trigger to me is today, the internet is still a huge trigger where loyalty isn't what it used to be. It is eroding very quickly, and retailers are trying to maintain customer loyalty, reduce churn. So that itself is a trigger. The technology capabilities are forcing it. Last year, I think it was more so mainly because the way people could shop was heavily impacted, and retailers had to react to it very quickly in order to survive. And I think in a lot of cases, it is the ones that transform very quickly are the ones that can survive, the ones that are always looking ahead into technologies and what could happen and are already prepared are the ones that have survived in the past. The ones that are always in a very reactive mode have struggled historically. And I think the challenge is really that retailers should continue to be in that mode where they are innovating for possible changes in the ecosystem. They're looking at that next wave, what is going to happen, what are our customers expecting, and not being in a reactive mode. I think the biggest challenge for retailers today is being in a reactive mode. I think many sort of went into reactive last year and did not see what was coming.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I think I'd also add to that, historically, traditional retailers, very much controlled their own pace of innovation, right? How fast they wanted to innovate, what they wanted to do where. All of a sudden, they don't have that control anymore. Obviously, again, the past 12, 18 months, a lot of it driven by the internet, online shopping, e-commerce, et cetera. I guess from my perspective, I'd broaden that out to sort of think of the digitalization of the whole industry and what's happening today. And I think one of the big challenges that traditional retailers increasingly are going to have is trying to keep pace with innovation that's happening everywhere, right? So it's not only everything around e-commerce today, in that everything digital related to that around user engagement, which brings with it personalization that impacts business models, all these other things. But, things like computer vision platforms, right? Like Amazon Go. Now digitizing the store, right? Bringing with it all new capabilities, new ways to think about retail and understand what's happening inside the store and reacting to that. Automation across everything, the supply chain, et cetera. And I think from my perspective, it's the big challenge is, can retailers keep pace with all this now happening in an ever faster pace everywhere across their organization today?
Yep. And when I'm working, so I work with a lot of the innovative startups and disruptors in the space. And one of the challenges when I'm having the conversations with retailers is, if they look at it as in the lens of, here is something innovative that we need to do, they don't really tend to adopt that, because that really isn't going anywhere. It is about, here's a shiny new toy. Here's a cool way of using augmented reality or mixed reality in my store. But really, I think if they have created the vision of where they want to be, what are the possible disruptors that they are going to be fighting against over the next couple of years, and are planning for how do we address those things and what technologies do we need to overcome? What's our strategy for online? What's our strategy for omnichannel? What's our strategy for all of the possibilities that's going to come along the way? I think, and then mapping in the capabilities they want to use. I think that is the approach that many of the retailers that I work with have succeeded. And then there is ones that are kind of randomly looking at interesting technology, experimenting with it, but it is not part of a bigger vision or a strategy. And I think that's where I've seen success or failure in implementing new things. And a lot of the startup technologies have been implemented, but have not really gone anywhere. In some cases, they have, and that's because it was part of that bigger strategy, and they know why they're implementing it, what they're trying to address, and they kind of seen the, what's going to happen in that shopper journey in 2 years. What is the expectations of shoppers, and can we plan for it now rather than react to some situation that happens?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, in fact, I think Gary, several weeks ago, months ago at this point, we've had retailers on our show, and we're talking about what does it take to make this change happen. It's not just a matter of technology being available, but it's also the organizational change and the vision coming top down, being communicated well enough so you can change the culture.
Exactly.
Right, because especially in the industry that we are focused on at Bird's Eye, which is supermarket, everything is so operational focused. Right, there's it's rare. I mean, there are several of them, and we work with quite a few of them that are visionary and kind of do things ahead of the curve. A lot of them last year, for example, they were just scrambling to get all the e-commerce stuff in place and to get anything that they can off the shelf to keep business going. Now, of course, last year, the supermarkets did extremely well. I don't think any of them is really complaining. They probably had their best year in a long time. And I think this year we're seeing a lot of them kind of wake up and say, hey, we've got to start doing something with our data. Otherwise, these people who are online businesses, who are digital natives, are going to start coming into the physical, business and eat our lunch, because they're already digitally trained to handle data in a fashion that that can get the maximum out of it. And the interesting thing, ShiSh, at least what we see in supermarket retail is there's oodles of data, right? It's incredibly, first-party data is so rich that you barely have to look beyond your own first-party data to understand your customers. Whereas in most other retail, you have to scrounge around 20 different things to put together a piece of what your customer looks like. And I think the complacency of having so much data is sometimes, having too much is actually a detriment, because you don't tend to be innovative on the cutting edge. But
Right.
we're
Yeah.
seeing a lot of retailers now come up and realize what they have on their hands and say, hey, we've got to start doing something um, with this stuff, right? But the question, and I'm going to pose this to both to Gary and ShiSh, is, it's a question of innovation. Most typical, at least in the supermarket and grocery retail vertical, innovation is not a department in a company. You know what I mean? And so what does it take for what does it take for some retailers? And these people have been successful. Some of these companies have been around for 100 years. So they've gone through many waves and many disruptions in the economy, and they're still there. So that's a testament to the fact of their resilience to generally what happens. But what is your opinion about how you bring this culture of innovation into a retail organization?
Yep. And that's an interesting question, because over the last couple of years, I've worked with retailers that did have innovation teams within the company. And in many cases, those innovation teams were a silo that worked independently, were not connected to the parent company in any way. And when I work with startups, they would experiment with a lot of these. They would do proof of concepts and pilots and all of those, but implementing that was always a challenge, because now they had to deal with the operations team, and now in the real world, they don't work exactly the way they did in a pilot in a lab. So I kind of think the siloed approach to innovation does not quite work, but rather having a innovation culture within the company itself, where innovation is part of what the operations of the stores has, and there is innovation, and innovation is an element of the business, and it's top down, like you mentioned, where there is a drive to figure out, what's that next couple of years going to look like for each part of that business. What's that supply chain going to look like? What's the store operations going to look like? What are the possible disruptors that they need to be worrying about? And what is the plan in place? And I think if it is an integral part of that organization, one, when we do an implementation with them, it is being implemented in one of their stores. It is part of that bigger plan. It is not a separate implementation. And I think that is where I've seen success and failure in companies where innovation is part of the mainstream organization. We've actually seen success. And in cases where it's not, we've seen pilots, and that's where it ended. And we've just seen a series of pilots that really didn't get anywhere. And when it came for the actual disruptor came in place, the company wasn't ready to handle it, because the innovation team kind of did their own thing separate from the main company. At least that was my observation.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. From my discussions and work with retailers, and what I'm seeing is, I think a couple things. One is where that innovation is coming from, right? Being driven by an innovation team or elsewhere in the company. As soon as it runs into operations, is where the big disconnect begins to happen, right? And even big retailers really struggling with, gee, we've always done it this way. What do you mean we have to change, right? It's not broken. Why do we have to change? It's overcoming that sort of cultural hurdle that I see a lot of companies grapple with, including, again, some big retailers. I think the other piece of it, again, that I'm seeing is, retail, as Shekar, I think you were just saying, retail is detail, right? It's all about execution. Retail, certainly grocery retail, operates on razor thin profit margins. It's all about cost control, execution, et cetera. And that has created a culture over the years of almost shying away from any kind of risk in doing new, different things, right? Until they've been proven out by someone else somewhere else. And along with that, because of that execution culture, I find a lot of retail executives aren't as attuned to thinking strategically. to stepping back and understanding not only new technologies, but more so the implications of those new technologies and where things, ShiSh, as you were saying, could go, what these can support doing, and thinking sort of outside the box to do that.
Totally agree. And you know, great example. Several retailers started rolling out robots on the store floor. And in many cases, they hadn't prepared the organization as well for it. They hadn't prepared the employees for it, and the expectations. And there was, I would say, animosity from the employees towards the robots. And that was, I think, an interesting example, and I would say a case study of how things should and shouldn't be implemented. And
Do you have any examples of innovation that's kind of succeeded, where you've kind of seen the organization buy into it and actually roll it out successfully?
So one of the ones that I've seen is in pick and pack robotics, which is backroom, of course, and I would say the driver for it was really the 2020 in a way. Many call it the 2020 to be the CTO of retail. And really what I've kind of seen is several pick and pack. I've been working with pick and pack robots for the last couple of years, and there was not much of a pickup on it. There were retailers experimenting with it. But then when 2020 happened, what really the big transformation in my mind was the stores truly started becoming, one, dark stores in some cases, and micro warehouses or partial micro warehouses in many cases, and online ordering picked up. And as a result, there was some level of automation needed to do the pick and pack, and a lot of retailers started looking at pick and pack robotics. There was several companies I was working with. Alert Innovation was one of them, which prior to 2020 didn't have a lot of implementations, but then 2020 was sort of, I would say, the tipping point. Several of the pick and pack robotics kind of are currently being deployed across all of the stores in Walmart and elsewhere as well. And I think that was, I would say, a successful implementation because it was one of those things where the vision for micro warehouses was already built within many of the visionary retailers who said this is going to be the future. They started preparing for it a couple of years ahead. It wasn't an idea they picked up in 2020. It was something that was in the works for a couple of years, and then it just mushroomed in 2020.
Yeah, so I think that's a good example, but I think one of the reasons that tech has been picked up and embraced by a growing number of retailers is because it fits with how retailers think and operate, right? Back to my comments of a few minutes ago, retail is all about execution, cost control, efficiencies, and so on. Micro fulfillment centers, automating distribution fits really neatly into that, right? It makes logical sense. It's intuitive. And certainly, again, in the last 12 to 18 months, all of a sudden, hey, we need that if we're going to make online profitable, right? So there was the trigger and the driver. I think other areas where innovation begins impacting business models, user experience, those areas I think are harder or more challenging for retailers to get their hands around and implement and move forward with. Right? That where it requires breaking something that they don't think is broken and replacing it with something new. That's where I think this gets more challenging.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
No, I think excellent points both of you brought up. So ShiSh, in your opinion, if you were to bet your money on the next few things, big things happening in the next 2-3 years, what would be some of those areas that you think big?
So one of the areas I think is going to be a big tipping point is, I think I mentioned it earlier, is additive manufacturing. Supply chain is a massive issue right now, and it's getting worse. It went from cars to appliances and everything else. And I think in the apparel world as well, I'm kind of seeing a challenge, for example, in fast fashion, where Zara is leading, but then all its competitors are struggling with the supply chain. They're finding new designs, but it's impossible to get that design in stores in less than 3 months, which is too long. And I think additive manufacturing addresses a lot of those challenges. It addresses offshore manufacturing. It addresses supply chain delays. It addresses logistics and cost of shipping. And it plays a part in many retail aspects. One is, a company like Home Depot, Lowe's, for example, spare parts could be on demand. A lot of things could be built in custom. So inventory could be, you could have that endless aisle concept with additive manufacturing. With apparel, it gets even more interesting. The whole aspect of custom outfits on demand in the store. I think that's a very interesting aspect of it. It changes the world of e-commerce. It changes inventory, it changes a lot of things. Today we have self-published books, for example, and that concept where designers could actually go to a marketplace and publish their digital designs, which could be purchased and printed. I think that, to me, is that big disruptor to the supply chain and e-commerce that is
NFT for
happening.
design.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's a lot of that happening, and we're going to see the results of that, I would say, in under 2 years.
Wow. So that's in the design field. I know you have had some thoughts on grocery retail as well. In fact, I think I saw a video of yours where you were talking about a location analytics platform that you were maybe Microsoft startups, or some internal.
Well, I at some point I worked in engineering in Azure Maps, which is a geospatial platform, and that whole area is totally fascinating because and in a way controversial, not the geospatial aspect, right, but the data behind it. So many of the companies that I've worked with were data aggregators that collected mobile data, and that in itself, I mean, that gives so much information to retailers. I'm sure that's you're familiar with that aspect of it, which is if I'm collecting location data, I can build your persona with inference models. I know where you live based on the patterns of where you go to every evening. I can build a profile of where you work because that location data tells me that. I can build a profile of how athletic you are based on what kind of activities you do. I can determine whether you have a dog or not based on whether you go to a dog park. I can determine what kind of food you like based on the restaurants you go to and all of that. So I'm kind of piecing all of that information using location data, building a profile about you, and then using that for personalization. In addition to that location data, there's other really fascinating examples that I've been looking at where things like catchment analysis, where I'm analyzing a location, a retail location, and I'm using that mobile data to determine what's the pattern of people that come in? What's the traffic look like? Is this a busy location? And if it is a busy location, what are the places people go to? And because each of those dots in the location data has got demographic data associated with it, I can tell what's the average gender and age group and segment of people that come to these locations. Where do they go to? Mondays, what are the kind of people that go there versus a weekend, all of that. I can then use it with conversion data to determine, all of these people coming in, where the sales happening. I can figure out correlations. People come to this restaurant and they go somewhere else. And then I can drive promotions based on that. So it is a fascinating world. I think the whole location and geospatial and driving personalization and understanding people with that, and that's a huge opportunity in that space.
Yeah. So what else? What's your take on, what's happening in grocery in terms of touchless commerce? Do you see a huge future in that?
I do. So, well, grocery in terms of touchless, my personal view is, grocery in itself is generally not 100%, but is going in the autonomous direction. And when I say autonomous direction, is right from the customer ordering. Like for today, if I were to look at retail as two different extremes. On the one hand is, I would say, experiential retail, which is fashion and everything else, where the focus is going to be on experience, on theater, on personalization. On the other extreme, I would say convenience and express, where this is going towards the direction of autonomous, and grocery falls in that other extreme, where people are kind of saying shopping, there's one part of shopping that I'm going to enjoy, that's going to be discovery, that's going to be theater, and there's going to be another part of shopping that is going to be seamless, autonomous, invisible, and it's going to automatically happen. So my pantry and my refrigerator will automatically fill up, and I don't have to worry about that aspect of it. So I'm kind of seeing, many of the startups I'm working with, where from a home perspective, looking at the patterns of what you buy, finding the repetitive nature of what you buy and say, we can convert that to a subscription so you don't have to add it to your shopping list anymore. So it's automated. And then there is, in the IoT world, all of the sensors that come into play that determine, when you run out of something or close to run out of something, can it automatically reorder? So that level of automation. And those orders are going to a system that will determine what's the closest micro warehouse for you for micro fulfillment. The pick and pack robotics will come into play and pack everything up and either make it available for curbside pickup or in-store pickup or delivery. And then the whole area that we're seeing with autonomous delivery, everything from drones to ground vehicles for delivery. And I think there's a whole lot of automation happening in the entire life cycle of grocery that is interesting. How soon will that happen? There's elements of that already in place. And, I think we're kind of going towards that. Will grocery shopping be 100% autonomous? Maybe not. But I think for a lot of people, big elements of it will be right from home to actually fulfillment.
Yeah. ShiSh, give me your thoughts on another kind of automation. And I'm thinking of, business process automation, right? That is enabled by AI expert systems and so on. We're seeing this in other industries, financial services, insurance, et cetera. And the more I've thought about this, I see this as, again, really transformative to retail, right?
Yep.
You look at, across retail today, and again, whether it's small store, but bigger organizations, the dozens, hundreds of people tasked with making routine decisions around, do we pick this new product up? Where is it placed in the store? What retail price do we put on it? How much inventory do we order? When do we promote it? That lends itself to expert systems. Bird's Eye is playing in the space of marketing automation, right? Again, potentially eliminating or freeing up, teams of people on the retail side. But it's more than just resource savings or reallocation, right? These systems, ultimately make better decisions than human beings can make, more effective decisions, and make them much, much faster.
Yeah.
So give me your thoughts around that space.
I think there's a lot happening in that space. One of them that I can think of is, digital twin. Digital twin technology and IoT is, was never used in retail as much. It was mainly being used in manufacturing. But I've kind of seen a lot of retailers exploring it for, among other things, it is for supply chain. So the decisions on, to ensure that the products are in store very quickly, and they want to figure out based on situations happening, they will determine which warehouse should it be fulfilled from, should it be moved from a store. So all of that simulation is happening in the digital twin, and the decisions are automated, where when certain things happen, the digital twin model will automatically determine where should it be fulfilled from. And this is dynamic and it's constantly happening. And this is where I think that complex decision processes that need to happen to ensure the supply chain to be functioning smoothly, where changes need to happen based on situations like a ship getting stuck in the Suez Canal or so things like that, or weather patterns. So that's one element where I'm seeing that the decision support or automated decision making is happening in supply chain. The other one that I saw as well is processes that are being connected. Like, for example, I'm working with a startup called Stratasynth that has got a smell sensor. So it's a electronic nose, and we're working with grocers where food spoilage is a big issue, and they're able to train the AI models to detect, what does this smell like for a certain food when it's bad, when it's about to go bad. And they're putting a level of automation into it, where when it detects something is about to go bad, they're plugging it into their dynamic pricing system so that the pricing is automatically adjusted, and the human element is completely removed. The systems are taking over. They're detecting the smell, controlling the prices, or if something is out of stock, for example, the shelf sensors detect something is missing from the shelf, it'll automatically trigger a notification to a store associate, will replenish it. So that level of automation is actually connecting systems together is increasing. And I think it's been fascinating to see all of those tiny little automations connecting systems.
Yes.
It's almost like systems talking to each other, and that is super fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, Gary, I think we could continue for another couple of hours here. And I have a feeling that if people are listening to this podcast in the car, they might lose their way or decide they want to get to their destination longer because this is so fascinating. But ShiSh, we got to get you back on here because this conversation can possibly end with this episode, because I feel that we have a lot of overlap in terms of what we work on, what we see, and I think definitely a lot of ideas to be exchanged. And I think personally, I'm going to be listening to this recording again, because there's a lot of points that you made, I think, which are very deep, and I really appreciate you taking the time coming on the show and sharing all these amazing thoughts. And I hope you'll accept another invitation to come back on in a few
Absolutely.
Yeah, and next time on, you'll come on with the retail perch mug, and we'll all have coffee together, or whatever you put in that mug. It's up to you, right? But Gary, any thoughts?
No, this has been really fascinating. I agree. I'd love to get you back on, because there's just so much more we can talk about here.
Yeah, and I think the unique perspective that I see here, ShiSh, is, of course, we are, relatively siloed. I live in the grocery retail vertical world, but you are looking at retail in a more, wider perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to have a conversation about how different retail verticals can actually impact innovation.
Yep.
What can you learn from the fashion industry that can be applied in grocery, or vice versa, right? Because I think that degree of cross-pollination is not happening. And what I find is that people, like fashion retail or specialty retail, tend to be much more innovative because they're more data scarce, and they have to be innovative about collecting data, transforming it into something that's meaningful, and how those practices can maybe be used and leveraged by somebody in grocery retail, right? Because
exactly.
I'd love to have a conversation around things like that, because I think ultimately innovation comes from learning from what's happening in one field, and figuring out how to map it to use it in another field, right? Immediate application of innovation, right? So. No, it's been fascinating. I'd love to get you back on as a guest if you can slot us in your busy times. But
absolutely,
fascinating conversation, ShiSh. I just want to, if you want to, anything that you want to And tell our listeners before we sign off, Fred.
This has been, I would say, a very fascinating conversation. I think the inputs and insights, both from you, Shekar, and Gary, has been very interesting. It's made that conversation very lively, and I look forward to having more conversations with you. From a startup's perspective, I'm always looking for innovations. That's what excites me. So if any startups are listening to this, feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah, please do. And I certainly will as bird's eye after this for sure.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. But I wanted to thank all you guys out there who've been listening to us, and hopefully we've been providing value and bringing some interesting content. I think today's is a departure from most stuff that we talk about. We're talking about overall retail landscape, and if you got any requests, please keep them coming in. I do want to thank Stephanie Doherty, who produces the show for us. So she does an amazing job, and appreciate you guys following us. And if you want to be a guest in the show, like I said again, just email us, theretailperch@birdseye.com, and we'll certainly be happy to look into it. With that, it's over for today. We'll talk to you guys soon. Make sure to join us every Monday and connect with us at The Retail Perch on Instagram and Facebook.
And if you have any questions, feel free to email us at theretailperch@birdseye.com.
Until next time, this is Shekar.
And this is Gary signing off.